searching for a really hard, concrete, factual proof of various religious concepts is probably going to just frustrate you. And so that's what I wanted. I wanted it to be frustrating intentionally because that's life.
I'm very excited to talk with you about this movie. It was really quite the treat from start to finish. And one of the things that blew me away right out the gate was that I didn't realize this was based on a true story until I started watching it. And so how did you first come across this insane true story, and what about it really sparked your interest to want to, help bring it to life?
Yeah, it was so random. I heard about it on the radio like 10 years ago, and they just kind of like brush off, like said, oh yeah, there was this paranormal investigator named Nandor Fodor who investigated this talking mongoose on the Isle of Man. And I was like, what? Did I just hear that properly? And then I was like, okay. And so I would always tell people, as I made other movies, I was like, I'm going to make this talking mongoose movie someday. And they're like, what the hell are you talking about? And then finally something like I kind of peripherally experienced like a very odd sort of religious thing with a friend, and that was it. The two married, and because I never wanted to do just like a straight biopic about it, that didn't interest me. But when I found that metaphor within the story, I was like, okay, that now it works. And so I wrote it, and that was it.
In not wanting to take just the direct biopic route with it, what was it like finding that right balance and tone of, ensuring that this stayed true to the facts of the real story while also, like you say, doing something different?
It's kind of picking and choosing. The story's so interesting and so crazy. And there are aspects of the film that are directly from what happened. Like there's a section toward the beginning that, as I was editing it, I was like, God, this scene's kind of long, but it's directly taken from the notebook of a guy named Dr. Harry Price, who went out and investigated this mongoose. I mean, literally, like I cut and pasted, like I took it from his actual notes of this incident and depicted them on screen. And then, there's those kind of added to the overall sort of story that I wanted to tell, and the sort of undertones and stuff like that. And so then, there's a lot of it is real, and I mean, at least really happened. And then a lot of it I used to kind of suit my own narrative, I would say.
Can you give me an example of one such scene in which it like you say, suited your narrative instead of strictly being fact-based?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I created a couple characters. Like the character Minnie plays, Anne, is fictional, right? And so I wanted the themes that I was trying to explore with this film are mostly about like kind of cynicism and faith, and their relationship with happiness, right? And so, obviously Nandor is fighting so hard to not buy in, right? And Anne isn't. She's open to it. And there's kind of like a progression with the characters of a descent into further unhappiness with Nandor and his staunch refusal to accept anything spiritual could exist. And then the opposite with Minnie's character. And so I would say, like, it's not a scene, but as a character, she was serving that purpose, and I think did an amazing job.
I do like the dichotomy of their personalities and how it plays into their dynamic. It's a wonderful relationship to see play out throughout the film. And so then in looking at casting, I mean, Simon, everybody loves him. I've loved him forever. He's shown such a great range. I think The World's End is one of my favorites for his performance of how he can be just as dramatic as he can be comedic. And so in looking for the perfect person to play Nandor, I mean, was Simon one of the first people that came to your head? Or
Absolutely.
How did you go about finding him?
After the script was done and we were starting to put it together, casting director had a list of names. I zeroed in on him. I was like, oh yeah, because I knew I needed somebody who could do comedic and dramatic, because I knew my intention with the film from the beginning was to focus to an extent on the comedy, because I knew that it would be dramatic. I knew there were those moments, but I wanted those moments to happen naturally within a comedic setting. That's why the film is like a shorter film, and it's edited like somewhat, it's supposed to move, right? And so I did that intentionally because I wanted it to be comedic, and Simon's obviously a master of that. And yeah, I mean, he really identified with the character, and getting him on board was a pretty smooth, seamless thing, which was amazing. And he's one of my idols and a guy I've wanted to work with forever. And his performance is phenomenal.
It truly is. And so in speaking to his performance, I'm curious if there was anything he brought to the role that you didn't already have on the page or that you didn't already have in mind.
Every note that Simon had with regard to the script or anything was great. I mean, the guy's such a pro that sometimes actors will give me notes and I'm like, no, Simon was like everything. He was like, oh man, that's spot on. And he did the accent. And I was like, not sure because, he's like, I want to do this sort of Hungarian American accent. And I was like, so here's this like very prominent British actor who everybody knows as a British actor, surrounded by British actors playing British people. And he wants to not be British. And I was like, all right, I love it. Let's do it. And then he, worked on it and debuted it for me. And I was just like, oh my God, it sounded like Christoph Waltz. It was beautiful. I loved it. And so I said, yeah, man, like that, let's do it. So he brought a ton to the role that wasn't on the page. And so did Minnie. I have to say, Minnie, that character was not written as funny as Minnie is. And she's hilarious. I mean, she has some of my favorite comedic moments in the film. She's really funny. And I didn't know that really, I'd never really seen that sort of very quirky, funny sensibility from Minnie. It was great.
I love Minnie. I mean, one of my favorites to this day is still Grosse Point Blank. I rewatch it all the time. And whenever I tell somebody about her, I'll go watch that one if you haven't already. It's underrated.
Absolutely.
And so she also just brings such a great warmth to the role. And you just mentioned the funny that she brings, or the comedy that she brings to the role. And so I'm curious how it was working with her on set, trying to find that right balance of that humor with the heart and the curiosity that character invited.
My general kind of way that I work with my actors is I give them free rein to an extent. Like my general philosophy about actors, especially actors like Minnie Driver or Simon Pegg or guys I've worked with before, like John Malkovich or Tom Berenger, like these guys who have been around forever, like they're better at acting than I will ever even conceive of being. They know more about acting than I will ever even know. And so what I try to do is I just give them insights about the character and what I intended for the character and what I intend for the tone of the film and just kind of my intentions. And then I let them interpret them. And I really do try to give them free rein and to let them interpret those things because they're going to know better how to do that, having done it so many times than I am. So all I can do is kind of serve as a guide. And so with Minnie, it was the same thing. She would come to me with a suggestion and she would always have an extremely good reason why she thought she should do it. And I would say 9 times out of 10, I said yes. And I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do it. And she was spot on.
Well, it sounds like you had some wonderful creative partnerships on set with this film. I'm glad to hear that. For my final casting specific question, and I'm sure everybody wants to ask about it, but Neil, I mean, that is such a unique casting choice and one that I think plays well for Jeff. How did that come to be?
We actually had a relative of his in the film. So it was very random. And as we were, I kept saying, I need somebody to voice Jeff. I need somebody to voice Jeff. I want somebody cool. I want somebody interesting. And he one day said, oh, man, what about Neil? My uncle. I was like, what? I was like, really? And he's like, yeah, he's got a great voice. And I was like, okay. And so Neil, there were a number of sort of like high points for my career as parts of this movie, like just things I'll always remember. And one of them was my first call with Neil or first conversation with Neil, where he said, I read the script and I absolutely loved it. It was brilliant. And I was like, oh man, you don't know what that means. You're one of my favorite writers. And he knew about Jeff and he knew about the whole story. And so he was and he loves Simon and he loves Minnie and he was very excited to come on board. And I met him at a refurbished church in upstate New York in the middle of nowhere that serves as a recording studio. And we recorded everything in a day and it was beautiful. And I let him do whatever he wanted and have free reign. And it was just amazing spending time with him. He's a lovely guy.
I've interviewed him once before and he is just such a wholesome person.
He is. And so unassuming.
Exactly. Given the darkness that he writes, it's interesting to see how
it usually is.
Now, in talking about the tone of this movie, I love the visual look of this film. I mean, it feels like a horror movie at times. It feels like a period drama. It feels like an outright comedy. How did you go about working with your DP to develop this unique look and feel for this movie?
My DP is incredible. Her name's Sarah Dean. I found her during the search for, on Nandor, and I had seen she DP'd a film called Anna and the Apocalypse that I really liked. And she's the biggest thing for me with the DP is just how I get along with them and our relationship on set. And I mean, she is like a ray of sunshine, legitimately. And so I actually just shot a movie. I just wrapped it about a month ago, and I dragged her all the way from England to Arkansas to shoot it with me. Like she's my DP, And so, what I wanted for Nandor was a very cinematic, traditional feel. I wanted a lot of, cinematically lit scenes, smooth, slow camera moves. I wanted it to feel very cinematic, and Sarah totally got that and understood it. And I mean, it looks fantastic. Like she really knows how to make a scene look beautiful. I mean, she does. Like, she's an incredible DP. I have so much respect for her.
It really is a rich visual palette throughout this movie. And so in mentioning that you wanted to make it feel as cinematic as possible, did you have any key inspirations for the look of this movie? Because I mean, my mind immediately when Simon walks up to his house is The Exorcist.
Oh, yeah. Well, that shot, yes, of course. That's like a direct homage to The Exorcist. Like that's like probably the most unsubtle shot in the film. It was directly, I wanted it to look like the cover of The Exorcist. Otherwise, just British drama was kind of the concept that I wanted, like something that felt very authentic, and honestly, like a lot of British shows that I used to watch as a kid. That was kind of the vibe I was going for. I wanted it to be a British dark comedy. And so, like, inspiration wise, yeah, I mean, almost like a gothic look to a lot of the sets. And then when they're out on the Isle, I wanted to really just have it feel like England and show a lot of the moors and caves and rain. And, like that was really the biggest thing. Was I just wanted the audiences to feel the Britishness of it.
It does feel very much entrenched in that region in a good way. In a good way. I love it. So in crafting that look and feel to it, then what would you say was one of the more challenging sequences to put together for the film?
Oh my God. The hardest scene to shoot was at the cave. And it was because it was just so cold and so windy and so rainy that day. And I don't know how it looks like as good as it does, but I mean, we were in a real cave in the middle of the moors, and it was wet and slippery and dark and windy as hell. And I mean, I remember distinctly that day. I'd been on set for about 2 hours, just freezing and trying not to die. And the crew were up there. And then Simon and Minnie came up in the car that was driving them up this hill, because it was like in the middle of the moors. And so they were in kind of like a Range Rover or something like that. And they rolled up, and they were both real excited and in the back seat, and Simon rolled down the window, and I just looked at them and said, guys, today's going to suck. There's just no way around. And they both kind of like, okay, fine. And they were both so cool about it. And even Minnie was like, she's like, we're shooting in Yorkshire. I was expecting this weather. This is British weather. I was like, okay, good. Because I live in LA, so I'm not used to this weather, but I'm glad you guys are. And so, but that was definitely the roughest day of shooting for sure. But it turned out to be one of my favorite scenes.
It really is. That weather actually adds a really unique layer to that scene in particular. So if anything, it was a blessing in disguise. For my final question, I mean, it's not quite a spoiler, but it's a bit of one. You show parts of the mongoose throughout the movie. And given that, like you say, you wanted to do something that wasn't necessarily a straight biopic, but sort of different, did you ever consider actually having a scene in which we full on see the mongoose, whether it be with Nandor or any other character in the movie?
No, I specifically didn't want to, because one of the main themes in this is sort of the frustration that I think accompanies a search for truth in life. And the fact that you can accept things, and people can tell you things, and you can accept them, and you can make yourself believe them, but searching for a really hard, concrete factual proof of various religious concepts is probably going to just frustrate you. And so that's what I wanted. I wanted it to be frustrating intentionally, because that's life, you know?
Well, it plays out very well for the themes of the movie, like you say. A part of me admittedly wanted to see it, but at the same time, as I took in what everybody was saying, I was like,
maybe the second one will be like the Nandor and Mongoose show. Like they'll have their own like investigating crew. So
there you go.
Scooby-Doo. Yeah.
Do an alternate history sequel. I like it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. I greatly appreciate it. I really did love this movie, and I really can't wait to spread the word about it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.